The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "A rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He summoned him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward.' The steward said to himself, 'What shall I do, now that my master is taking the position of steward away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that, when I am removed from the stewardship, they may welcome me into their homes.' He called in his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, 'How much do you owe my master?' He replied, 100 measures of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Quickly write down one for 50. Then to another the steward said, 'And you, how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 cores of wheat. The steward said to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Write one for 80. And the master commended that dishonest steward for acting prudently. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourself with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. The person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If, therefore, you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Some of you may know that when I was a junior, I was followed by my younger brother of 2 years, Michael. He also decided that it would be a good idea to come to UD. And while I was a major in philosophy and in theology, Michael majored in philosophy and in politics. And we sort of joked, and, like good brothers are apt to do, we joked that I had my head in the clouds, sort of looking up to the sky because I was studying theology. And being a politics major, his focus was on the ground, sort of real, practical, gritty reality of political life. And like good UD students are apt to do, we had a number of very good, very insightful, very late-night discussions about the nature of everything. And one of the conversations that I remember quite clearly revolved around a verse that we heard from today's Gospel. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. This is a fascinating pericope. This is a fascinating parable and words of Jesus that follow that parable. I really, really hope that as the gospel was being proclaimed, you were going, what? What is going on here? What is the meaning that Jesus is trying to teach us through the parable and then through his own words? This is one of the strangest parables that we find in the Gospels. It is perplexing, and it's far from clear on the surface level what is going on here. The parable on its own does not seem to make sense. It doesn't follow the standard rules or the pattern of rules that Luke has set out these last few weeks. There are many incongruencies inside the parable itself. For instance, who's the good guy? That is not clear. From the first verse, when Jesus starts telling this parable, it is not apparent who we are supposed to emulate. Is it the rich man? Well, think back the last few weeks. What has Jesus said about the rich? Jesus has very harsh words for those who store up for themselves earthly treasures. So it's not the rich man. That doesn't seem to fit the pattern that Luke is providing for us. So is it the steward? Well, in that same verse, how is the steward introduced? He's dishonest. He is reported to the master for squandering his property. And even at the very end of the parable, the steward is praised. Why? Why is the steward praised? What is prudent about his actions? Is he praised because he stores up for himself temporal security so that people will reciprocate his generosity? By the rules of the parable, the steward is not good, he's bad. He squanders the debt that is owed to his master. The responsibility of a good steward would be to carefully collect all of the debt that was owed to his master. But he doesn't do that. In fact, he does the opposite. So what's going on? Usually what happens after a parable is Jesus will explain. He'll enlighten the parable in some way. He will say, this is what I mean with this image. I don't know if it was ever your experience in class. It often happens in very obscure classes like philosophy of being. Someone would ask the professor a question, can you explain that? I don't really understand. And sometimes, the explanation of the professor didn't make things clear, but it made it worse. The words of Jesus here seem to make things more obscure, because what does he say? I tell you, make friends for yourself with the virtuous, with the holy, with those who follow God. No. Make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What is going on here? One possible interpretation of this passage from Luke's Gospel goes something like this. There are two stories that we are hearing about. The first story, we may not even immediately think of as a story. We sort of just take it for granted. The first story is the story, the drama of Jesus' life as Luke gives it to us. The drama of Jesus' birth, his ministry, his healing, his teaching, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. That's the first story. The second story is a story that takes place within the first. The second story is the story within the story of Jesus, the story or the world of the parables. Now, normally, these two stories are independent of each other. They sort of run parallel to each other, almost like two lanes of opposing traffic on a highway. But sometimes these lanes, these worlds, these stories cross over. Now, if I did what a professor sometimes did and made the situation more obtuse or more obscure, I will now attempt to make a nerd reference to prove my nerd street cred and maybe understand what's going on here in the Gospel. In Star Trek, bear with me. In Star Trek, there is a normal, regular universe with the sort of expected characters of Captain Kirk, of his first officer Spock, of Captain Sisko, of Worf, and a whole bunch of other men and women. And these characters behave in expected ways, right? If you know anything about Star Trek, you know that Kirk is the stereotypical good guy. He's a bit headstrong, maybe a bit prone to violence, but he is a good man. His first officer, Captain Spock, is logical, sometimes cold, but he does have a deep love and loyalty to his captain and to his crew. The universe, the normal sort of Star Trek universe, follows an expected pattern. There are rules that help people make sense of this universe, of this story. Now, alongside this normal universe is a parallel universe, if you will, a mirror universe, which has the same characters as the normal universe. But the characters in the parallel universe behave in very different ways. For example, in the parallel or in the mirror universe, Kirk exists, but he is not a good man. He is a bloodthirsty, evil captain. And his first officer, Spock, is quite morally ambiguous. This secondary story, the secondary universe, has its own set of rules. It has its own pattern. Now, normally, these two universes are independent of each other, but sometimes they cross over. Sometimes characters from one universe enter another, and vice versa. For instance, the first time that the mirror universe was introduced, the drama and the comedy and the tragedy happened because the good Kirk entered the evil universe and the evil Kirk entered the good universe. Go back to the Gospel. Who is the master? And the master commended that dishonest steward for acting prudently. In Greek, the words that are used is ho kurios. Who is that master? I'm really resisting a temptation to make a Doctor Who reference, but I'm not going to. Who is that master? Is it the rich man? Is the master the rich man that we heard at the beginning of the parable? If it's the rich man, it seems strange that the rich man, again, would praise the steward for writing off his debtor's debts. It doesn't follow the rules of that world, because according to the rules of the parable, a good steward would have dutifully collected all of the money that was owed to his master. So then, maybe the next obvious possibility of who the kurios is Jesus. Is the master Jesus? Well, again, this doesn't quite seem to fit. It seems strange, right, that Jesus would praise the steward for securing his temporal security. Or maybe to put it in the language of Luke, storing up for himself not heavenly treasure, but instead storing up for himself earthly treasure. This doesn't follow the rules that Luke has set out for his drama of Jesus. Rich men are not praised according to Luke's Gospel. These narratives, these stories, or universes, if you will, are meant to cross over into each other. The story of the parables intersects with the story of Jesus in Luke's Gospel and vice versa. And more than that, our own story, our own lives are meant to intersect both with the drama of the parables and the drama of Jesus' own life in the Gospel. As Catholics, we have the incredible blessing of experiencing this crossover, if you will, sacramentally at each and every Mass. The central character in the drama of the Gospels, the person who creates the world of the parables, intersects with our own lives, and he does so substantially and truly by being present under the visible species of bread and wine. Christ intersects with our lives by himself becoming present, offering us his body and his blood. This is the purpose of hearing the parables. This is the purpose of hearing week after week, year after year, the drama of the Gospels, is to allow our own lives, to allow our own world to collide with Jesus's. So back to that question. Who is the master? Who is the kurios? The ambiguity about who the master is meant to challenge us to answer for ourselves this question. Which master will you serve? Because according to the rules of the world of the parable, a good steward carefully collects all of the debts that are owed to his master. But according to the rules of the drama of Jesus' life that Luke is providing for us, a good steward imitates his master, and instead of collecting, he forgives all of the debts that are owed. The answer to the question, who is the master, is answered in each of our own lives when we decide who we will serve, an earthly master or the heavenly one. When I took Dr. Goodwin's Synoptic Gospel class, one of the things that he taught us is that a good parable is not easily explained. A good parable resists an easy resolution or a simple explanation. After all, parables are meant to express what cannot be expressed in words. They're meant to reveal to us the infinite mystery of the kingdom of God. The parable of the dishonest steward in this way is a most excellent parable because it challenges our beliefs about who we should serve and how we should serve them. As we prepare to come forward to receive the person of Christ into our own bodies, may we also receive him into our own story, into our lives.